In January 1946, 5 months after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki brought the world into the atomic age, Hal Wallace was rushing to make a film on the development of the atomic bomb. Its title? Top Secret. Ayn Rand was assigned to write, working from material supplied by a contact in the nation's capital. MGM also rushed to make a film and brought in atomic bomb expert Major General Leslie R. Groves to meet with them that month, just as Wallace would be reported days later to have consulted with him. Eventually, Wallace would sell his project to MGM so that MGM had no competition on the topic when it released its film The Beginning or the End in 1947. Paramount's plans for its Hal Wallace production about Tchaikovsky hit a snag when a rival production on the same subject was announced. Normally, Paramount didn't have to worry about competition from Monogram Pictures, but this time both were planning a Tchaikovsky film. Monogram Pictures was in the business of low-budget movies. This trade publication ad announcing its 1949 releases shows that none were destined for awards. However, Monogram had recently resolved to make better films and chose the studio name Allied Artists on these films so that the name Monogram would not appear on advertising. This trade ad lists Song of My Heart, the eventual title of the Allied Artists Tchaikovsky film. Variety let its readers know that Allied Artists was Monogram in its review of this fictionalized biography of Tchaikovsky, shown to the film trade in late 1947 and released to the public the next year. Produced at a cost of $600,000, it was twice as expensive as a major studio low-budget film and 6 times as costly as a standard Monogram picture. At Hal Wallace's studio, his Tchaikovsky project, like Lola Montez before it, never went before the cameras. The Fountainhead was delayed. In a January 26, 1947 interview, Clark Gable stated that he read The Fountainhead in 1943 and immediately wanted to play Rourke. Unfortunately, his studio, MGM, had lost out on the opportunity to be first to purchase the rights. Gable, when renegotiating his MGM contract prior to that interview, was reported to be attempting new terms allowing him to do The Fountainhead at Warner Brothers while also working at MGM most of each year. In what could have been an enormously expensive effort by MGM to bring the project to their studio, MGM offered Warner Brothers 9 times the $50,000 Warner Brothers had paid for the rights, but Warner Brothers refused their $450,000 offer. A Paramount leading lady, Veronica Lake, said she could see herself as Dominique, and it's easy to see Paramount's own top dramatic stars headlining their production. Alan Ladd resembles the Howard Rourke of the comic strip version of The Fountainhead, which appeared in newspapers for 30 days from 1945 into 1946. The character's appearances had Ayn Rand's approval.
No. I'll leave the door open so you can come through and answer the phone.
Alan Ladd was Paramount's resident tough guy actor as Humphrey Bogart was Warner's.
Yeah, you keep your nose clean.
2 years and 4 months after the first stories about Hal Wallace planning The Crying Sisters, this story appeared about actor Mickey Knox being considered for it. The last of the Hal Wallace projects we'll discuss, potential or made, is House of Mist. It would have a fairy tale atmosphere to tell a story of romance, suitable to be enjoyed by adults, and plans were considered to film in England. British performers may well have made up most or all of the cast had the film been made. On March 29, 1948, news was reported which should have been decided long before. The Fountainhead would star Gary Cooper. This item mentions Lauren Bacall as a possible Dominique. She was a major Warner Brothers star and had a tough demeanor. Had Rourke not been recast, she would be repeating already established screen chemistry. Before 1948 was over, she had starred 4 times opposite Humphrey Bogart, for 3 years now her off-screen husband. May 5th brought to Fountainhead news that Raymond Massey was cast as Gail Wynand. Patricia Neal is mentioned in passing here, as though already set. She played Dominique. Other actresses were reported in the running for the Dominique role. Lauren Bacall and Joan Crawford had been mentioned. Barbara Stanwyck is quoted as saying that she'll hear that she's on, and she's off. Barbara Stanwyck was the one person who convinced Warner Brothers to acquire the Fountainhead when it was an unknown property. On, off. You can imagine how Stanwyck felt.
I remember distinctly being fired.
That's right.
Would Joan Crawford work as Dominique? Here's Joan Crawford when confronted.
When you bust into a lady's room, you ought to get someone to introduce you, fella. You see, I'm a happy-go-lucky sort of a fella. It's true I'm broke now, but that don't worry me. I'll be all right as soon as I get to a pier. I got friends there. Thank you, though, for your interest. It's kind of you after what happened. I'm mighty glad John saw at me, because, well, I like to keep friends with everybody.
A week before shooting began, in a June 21st story, Patricia Neal is reported to have the lead, in a headline statement and report without ambiguity. The June 21st story continues by mentioning actresses who didn't get the role: Crawford, Stanwyck, Bacall. Included with them is a name we haven't mentioned before: Bette Davis. Bette Davis 8 years earlier had been intrigued by the role of Kira in The Unconquered, but at the advice of her management declined to do the play. We see her discuss a 1950 role which fascinated her.
Eve has insatiable ambition and talent. An improbable person with a contempt for humanity, an inability to love or be loved.
But how can such a woman fool so many?
How does any Eve do it?
Eleanor Parker had impressed people with her performance in the Bette Davis role in the 1946 remake of Human Bondage, and went on to more lead roles. A biography of Gary Cooper reports that Parker was considered to play Dominique. In this 1955 film, Eleanor Parker shows that she can convey headstrong emotions, even though the thoughts she expresses would never be spoken by an Ayn Rand heroine.
But you can't leave me. You gotta stay and take care of me.
Wrong.
No, you got it wrong, because you'll never get him. He put me in this chair, and as long as I sit here, he'll never leave me. He knows he belongs to me.
No, Sash, I come here only to
I
help.
wouldn't want to live if he left me. And I'd rather see him dead, too, than have him go to you.
Please.
Yes, get out of here! Get out of here, you lousy tramp!
Dominique would never have faked long-term disability to keep a man. Barbara Stanwyck discussed her removal from the Fountainhead cast 16 years afterward, and an obituary character explanation that director King Vidor rejected her. Stanwyck's portrayal of Dominique would have reunited her with Gary Cooper after two 1941 films. Seeing Stanwyck express love to Cooper in the following 1941 scene lets us see how she may have played Dominique to his Rourke.
If you'll just think of yourself as the real John Doe. Listen, everything in that speech are things a certain man believed in. He was my father, John. You know what my mother said the other night? She said to look into your eyes, that I'd see Father there.
Stanwyck had also been announced to play the Fountainhead opposite Humphrey Bogart. How they would play opposite each other was also captured on film, this time in The Two Mrs. Carrolls. This was not a coincidence. When the Fountainhead couldn't go before the cameras in early 1945 owing to a war-related shortage of building materials necessary for sets, Warner Brothers shifted their two lead Fountainhead actors to The Two Mrs. Carrolls. King Vidor completed shooting of the Fountainhead 2 days ahead of schedule and $200,000 under budget. Productions of Night of January 16th have been ongoing since the Broadway premiere, regionally, locally, at high schools and colleges, providing early opportunities for actors who would go on to national attention. Morgan Conway played lead roles in detective movies of the 1940s. A 1939 profile indicates he rose from a role in a Hollywood revival of Night of January 16th. The story has the title wrong. Here's Morgan Conway in 1945.
The professor said that 14 people, men and women, rich and poor, were marked for murder.
Did he make any statement before he died?
But 14 people, in such varied financial circumstances, and of both sexes, would have to become associated in only one place that I can think of. That would be a jury box.
A local production outside Boston in 1937, which drew as its female lead a sometimes movie actress and which boasted a member of the Broadway cast, also had among its South Shore players actress Natalie Schafer, who for a decade had worked intermittently on Broadway but had yet to perform in a Hollywood film. The Massachusetts Reviewer found that she won sympathy in the role of the pathetic young widow. The goofy performance we see her give here, on film 11 years later, is far from a performance evoking sympathy or sadness.
Nothing yet.
You wanted to visit a honky-tonk. Well, this is a honky-tonk, and I've had enough of it.
No, wait. Wonderful. Guns.
Yet, it is this goofy personality that she showed in her best-known role, that of the millionaire's wife on the Gilligan's Island television series.
Simply marvelous. He's absolutely insane.
I can't help it if he's crazy. Do you want to go back to where people aren't crazy?
Oh, no, not the world.
Well, all right then. Don't be telling me every minute that he's crazy.
Well, you needn't be huffy about it.
Gloria Stewart has become remembered as the old lady in the James Cameron version of Titanic, whose story is told in flashback. During the early and mid-1930s, she was a busy leading lady in films, including many horror classics. In between, however, she headlined Night of January 16 in Ridgefield, Connecticut in 1940, starting July 8. Fay Wray was also a busy lead actress in early 1930s Hollywood films, who thereafter has been most remembered for some classic horror films, particularly as the young woman in King Kong's hand in the original King Kong, and The Most Dangerous Game, which you are seeing here. In 1938, she was playing Karen Andre in Great Neck, New York, on Long Island. The program devoted more than a page to a biographical sketch of her.
There were 4 of us a week ago. The other 2 have disappeared.
What do you mean?
One night after dinner, the Count took one of our sailors down to see his trophy room. Neither has been seen since. Count Zareff was so interesting, I didn't realize the danger.
Rose Hobart had followed stardom on Broadway in the late 1920s with lead woman roles in some significant Hollywood films, including the 1930 version of Lilium and the Frederick March version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, another well-regarded horror film. She played Karen Andre in Maine in 1936.
I came because I love you.
What more do you want? I gave you your freedom.
Alan, tell you, it was all in your imagination. You were working hard.
Get out.
Playing the role of handwriting expert for the police, James Chandler, in that same Maine production was a 19-year-old man just starting out in the acting profession.
Well, now don't tell me. Let me guess.
A few years later, he would have the first role in many of a 44-years-long career of small and supporting roles in Hollywood movies. His name, Keenan Wynn.
She's got a lot of talent there. They were murder. His working hours are very peculiar. She's trying to hook a rich man. She's insincere and a moron.
Kitty Carlisle had starred in musical films, in Broadway shows, and on radio. She's remembered for being the leading lady opposite the Marx Brothers in their 1935 classic, A Night at the Opera. Her decades as a panelist on such television game shows as To Tell the Truth were still ahead. In 1938, Kitty Carlisle played Karen Andre in Locust Valley on Long Island. In her personal life, she was married to playwright Moss Hart, and the couple were best friends and constant companions with Bennett and Phyllis Cerf. Bennett Cerf was editor and publisher at Random House when the firm published Atlas Shrugged in 1957, and Cerf had constant dealings with Ayn Rand when Rand was a top author for the firm. Arthur Space was a busy actor in Hollywood during the 1940s and 1950s, bringing his dignified manner to roles as bankers, sheriffs, coroners, medical doctors, inventors, often in westerns. He got early experience in such roles in 1936 by playing the medical examiner in productions of Night of January 16 in Chicago and Pittsburgh.
What were you looking for?
Information on Talbot's death?
It was accidental death, you know that. You printed the story at the time. The circumstances, if you care to refresh your memory, were quite simple. He fell from his horse and struck his head.
You reporters don't seem to pay much attention to the law.
I caught you rifling my files.
Let's see what the sheriff has to say about it. See who signed the death certificate.
I signed it.
Remember, the examination better not show any new evidence. It doesn't match your official report.
I found him back there going through my files.